Here's the part that always hits the enemy the hardest. The louder they tried to write your ending, the quieter your rise made them. Read that again, my dear chosen ones. Because you didn't just flip the script, you snapped the pen in half and handed them the silence they earned. Let's talk. You ever notice how people get real brave when they think you're losing? How their whispers grow wings, their shade gets HD clarity, their confidence inflates like a cheap balloon one pinprick away from collapse? They thought they had your story figured out, didn't they? They thought you were the easy one, the quiet one, the won't fight back one. They mistook your calm for confusion and your patience for powerlessness. But here's the truth they never prepared for. You weren't stuck. You were studying. And now that the test is over, they're realizing you were the only one in the room with the answer key. My chosen ones, lean in, because this part isn't just a message, it's a revelation. There comes a moment in life when the whole table doesn't just turn, it gets flipped so hard, every fake smile, every whispered insult, every silent plot falls off and shatters on the floor. That moment is right now. And you're not just rising, you're rising in a way that forces everyone who doubted you to stare directly into the mirror they've been avoiding. Let me put it in idiomatic style for you. You didn't just play the game, you played it so clean the referees started asking you for pointers. You want to know why they're speechless now? Because you didn't react the way they rehearsed. They expected you to crumble, to clap back, to beg, to break. But you did something far more destructive to their ego. You evolved, quietly, strategically, intentionally, and nothing terrifies insecure people more than someone who grows without needing an audience. They threw shade, yet somehow you bloomed. They threw obstacles, yet somehow you leveled up. They threw doubts, yet somehow you became undeniable. And now they're panicking because the plot twist was never supposed to be you winning. But here you are, victorious, composed, elevated, and absolutely not asking for validation from anyone who tried to dim your shine. Some of you may be wondering, why did they do this to me? Why was I the target? Simple. Because being chosen has a weight to it, a presence, a frequency. People can sense potential even when it's quiet. And insecure minds always try to sabotage what they can't predict, control, or compete with. But what they never realized is that chosen ones, you, don't break under pressure. You crystallize, you get sharper, clearer, more unshakable. Think about it. Their whispers strengthened your intuition. Their games sharpened your strategy. Their doubts fueled your discipline. Their plots trained your perception. They thought they were burying you, but all they did was create the perfect environment for your breakthrough. They didn't silence you. They spotlighted you. They didn't block you. They built the stage you're now standing on. And now, my chosen ones, the same people who tried to dim you are squinting because your glow is too bright for their comfort. They didn't expect your comeback to be this clean, this quiet, or this powerful. They never imagined you'd walk back into the room carrying the very confidence they tried to strip from you. So buckle up. Because what we're about to break down in this video, it's not just how you won, it's how you outplayed, outpaced, and outgrown every single person who thought they could stop your rise. Let's dive in. And before we move forward, my dear chosen ones, take a breath and really feel this. You're here because you know this message is your mirror. You didn't stumble into this video. You arrived at the exact moment your strength needed a reminder of what you already are. If this title spoke to you, you played the game perfectly. They tried to stop you, and now they're the ones speechless. Then you already understand the power humming under your skin. So do this for yourself. Tap that like button, hit subscribe, and drop the number 77 in the comments if you're ready to claim the version of you that refuses to shrink ever again. And if you want to show extra love, Use the super thanks. It keeps this message reaching every other chosen one who needs it just as much as you do. Now lean in, because what we're about to break down next is the part only the truly chosen ever recognize. These aren't random signs. These are the exact markers that appear when someone is playing the game so flawlessly the opposition collapses under their own strategy. Ordinary people don't get this kind of shift, only the ones built for more do. So stay close, because if you really are who I think you are, every word from here on out is going to feel like someone finally said out loud what you've been living in silence. Let's get started. Number 1. When they misjudged you, you turned their doubt into ammunition. When they counted you out, you cashed in on their miscalculation. Nothing hits an enemy harder than realizing the person they overlooked was the one studying them the entire time. My dear chosen ones, this is where the shift truly began, long before you rose, long before they panicked, long before the room went silent. It started the moment they decided you were easy to underestimate. And you, with your subtle brilliance, let them. Not because you lacked strength, not because you were unsure, but because you understood one thing they never could. Underestimation is the cheapest camouflage a chosen one can wear. They looked at you and thought they were seeing the whole story, quiet, calm, soft-spoken, maybe even unsure of yourself. They made the classic mistake, confusing silence with softness, mistaking observation for weakness. They thought you didn't know how things worked, how people moved, how social games were played. But tell me, chosen ones, how do you expose someone's intentions if they don't first believe you're harmless? Exactly. You let them walk themselves right into the illusion they built. You let them think you didn't see the side eyes, the sarcastic comments, the staged alliances. They thought they were running the show while you were simply taking notes. Every whisper, every micro-expression, every strategic accident, you caught it all. You weren't reacting because you weren't meant to. You were collecting data, decoding patterns, unpacking their desperation disguised as confidence. And if you're wondering why this was necessary, why this had to happen, let me tell you, chosen one, people reveal their truest selves when they think they're superior. That's when the mask slips. That's when the ego performs. That's when insecurity becomes loud enough to study. They thought you were predictable, but predictable is the last thing you'll ever be. You were the quiet thunderstorm forming in the background while they stood outside bragging about how weatherproof they were. They thought you were a pawn on the board, simple and expendable. But they forgot the oldest idiom in the game. Even a pawn becomes unstoppable the moment it reaches the other side. And you reached the other side. Now they're shaking because they realize they can't undo what's already been awakened in you. They can't put you back in the box they built, can't shrink you back to the size they preferred, can't pretend they didn't see the shift happening right in front of them. What confuses them most isn't just that you succeeded, it's that you succeeded without matching their energy. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't argue, you didn't expose them, you simply elevated, and your elevation exposed them without you ever saying a word. They're speechless, not because you fought, but because you didn't have to. They played games, you played strategy, they performed, you prepared, they tried to manipulate the stage. You became the entire plot twist. That's the power of being chosen, my dear ones. You don't need to announce your value. You just need to move like someone who finally understands it. And that alone is enough to make every person who underestimated you wish they had paid attention when they had the chance. Number 2. Your quiet confidence was the strategy they never saw coming. When you chose humility, they mistook strategy for smallness. The greatest trick a chosen one ever pulls is letting the loud ones believe silence means surrender. My dear chosen ones, lean in, because this part right here is where most people completely misread you. They thought your humility was a crack in your armor, a sign you didn't know your worth, didn't know the game, didn't know how to stand tall in a world obsessed with noise. But what they never realized is that your humility was never a weakness. It was a calculated advantage, a weapon, a shield, a strategy so refined only someone operating on your level could even understand it. They watched you move quietly and assumed quiet meant clueless. They saw you keeping to yourself and took it as insecurity. They noticed you didn't brag, didn't push, didn't scramble for validation, and they wrote you off as someone who didn't believe in themselves. But chosen ones, my chosen ones, when did confidence ever need a megaphone? When did self-awareness ever need applause? While they were out there collecting attention like coupons, you were collecting clarity. You weren't chasing the spotlight because you knew that real power doesn't beg to be seen. It becomes impossible to ignore. You weren't competing because you already understood something life was eventually going to teach them. The loudest person in the room is usually the least prepared. And oh, did that truth reveal itself. You stayed humble because you didn't need to perform. You didn't need to broadcast your every step. You didn't need the world to clap for seeds that were still under the soil. Those branches they flaunted, those temporary highs they lived for, those moments of being seen. You watched it all, patient and unshaken, because you knew roots never brag, and yet roots outlive every storm. And when the storms came, every superficial thing they depended on blew away. The noise faded, the applause stopped, the masks cracked. Meanwhile you, still, steady, grounded, stood right where you were, stronger than ever. That wasn't luck. That was discipline. That was strategy. That was the power of someone who knows exactly who they are without needing anyone else to confirm it. They thought you stayed quiet because you didn't think you belonged. But chosen ones, the truth is far more dangerous for them. You stayed quiet because you didn't see a single person in that room worth wasting your voice on. You stayed in places you'd outgrown because you wanted to understand the full layout of the battlefield before you made your move. You observed who talked over you, who underestimated you, who pretended your insight wasn't valuable. They thought they were ignoring you. Really, they were identifying themselves. Now look at them. Confused, scrambling, whispering, replaying everything they ever said to you, trying to figure out how someone who never fought for attention ended up surpassing all of them without breaking a sweat. They don't understand how you got ahead because they never understood your strategy in the first place. They thought the game was about being loud. You knew the game was about being aligned. They played for crowds. You played for legacy. They chased moments, you built momentum. And now, my dear chosen ones, the same people who once mistook your calm for insecurity are realizing the truth. You were never quiet. You were intentional. You weren't hiding. You were preserving. You weren't competing. You were rising in a lane they didn't even know existed, because you were never in their race. You were already on your way to the finish line they couldn't see. Number 3, you built legacy while they performed for claps. While they performed for attention, you were quietly building an empire. My dear chosen ones, here's the part that stings your enemies the most. You didn't rush, and somehow you still outran them. That's what happens when someone plays the long game in a world full of people addicted to instant applause. They chased validation like moths sprinting toward a spotlight, burning themselves just to shine for a moment. But you moved differently. You moved with intention, with patience, with the understanding that anything meaningful takes time to solidify. While they threw themselves into quick wins and loud performances, you were laying bricks in silence, preparing for a future they never imagined you'd reach. They thought visibility meant victory. They believed being seen meant being successful. Every dramatic display, every post crafted for likes, every exaggerated performance was a desperate attempt to feel relevant. And the irony? The louder they became, the emptier their achievements grew, because applause fades, attention shifts, the spotlight burns out faster than it ignites. But chosen ones like you don't crumble when the noise stops, because you were never dependent on it in the first place. You stayed private in your growth, not because you were unsure, but because you understood that premature exposure ruins the strongest structures. You weren't interested in becoming a moment. You were committed to becoming a force, and forces don't announce their arrival. They build quietly until their presence becomes impossible to ignore. They thought your silence meant stagnation, but silence was your incubator, your training ground, your strategy. You were cultivating depth while they were chasing decoration. Chosen ones always know that true success isn't about popularity, it's about preparation. And preparation requires grit, solitude, discipline, and the willingness to be overlooked for a season. You embraced that season. You let your roots grow deep enough to withstand storms they can't survive. They were celebrating small, shallow wins while you were preparing for longevity. And now that the game has unfolded, the difference is obvious. Their hype fizzled, but your foundation is unshakable. Look at them now, scrambling to keep the attention they were once addicted to, fighting to stay relevant in a world that forgets performers the second the curtain drops. Meanwhile, you stand grounded, steady, and unbothered. You didn't rise because of noise. You rose because of consistency. You didn't break through because people clapped. You broke through because you refused to quit when no one was watching. This is why they're speechless. Not because you won, but because your win came from the very thing they mocked. Your patience, your privacy, your focus. They couldn't understand why you weren't rushing, why you weren't competing for attention. But now they see it clearly. You weren't trying to go viral. You were trying to go timeless. And here's the truth they'll never admit. You were playing chess while they were dancing for claps. And in the long game, strategy will always outrun spectacle. Number 4. You revealed only what served you. And that's why they never stood a chance. You didn't hide yourself. You curated access like a mastermind. My dear chosen ones, here's a truth the enemy still hasn't fully processed. You didn't survive by being invisible. You survived by being intentional. And nothing rattles people more than realizing the person they thought they had figured out was only showing them a carefully selected sliver of their true power. You mastered the art of controlled exposure, and that alone dismantled their entire strategy against you. See? While they were busy trying to read you like an open book, you were handing out photocopies of a single chapter, edited, redacted, intentionally incomplete. You knew from the beginning not everyone deserved access to the real you, the full you, the version operating 3 levels above their comprehension. So you gave them glimpses, fragments, a preview trailer with none of the plot twists. And because of that, they made the fatal mistake of assuming the small piece they saw was the whole picture. They labeled you soft because you didn't bark back. They labeled you slow because you didn't rush to speak. They labeled you clueless because you didn't play the game loud. But, chosen ones, you and I both know something they never imagined. You wanted them to believe that. Their underestimation wasn't a wound to you, it was a shield. It bought you time. It gave you space. It gave you something far more powerful than validation, the element of surprise. And here's the part that really burns them now. Your limited exposure meant their attacks never landed where they intended. How do you sabotage someone when you've never been allowed near their real foundations? How do you block a move when you've only seen 10% of the strategy? They were swinging at shadows while you were building your future in plain sight, hidden by their own arrogance. You weren't hiding, chosen one. You were selecting, selective with your energy because you understood not everyone can handle your frequency. Selective with your presence because not everyone is entitled to it. selective with your brilliance, because mystery is a weapon most people never learn to wield. And while they mistook your silence for passivity, you were actually aligning your next breakthrough with surgical precision. By the time they realized you were playing at full capacity, you had already moved into a space beyond their influence. They thought they were steps ahead, but the truth is, they were playing the wrong game on the wrong board against someone who already knew how every piece moved. They're confused now, trying to understand how you jumped so far, so fast, without warning. They're replaying conversations, reanalyzing moments, desperately searching for signs they missed. But they'll never find them, because you didn't broadcast your evolution. You became it, quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. And that's what destroyed their illusion of control, not confrontation, not chaos, not revenge, but your mastery of silence, timing, and selective exposure. You didn't overwhelm them, you outgrew them. Number 5. You decoded their tactics and rewrote the entire playbook. You didn't just endure their game, you cracked the code they built to trap you. The enemy's biggest mistake wasn't what they did to you, it was assuming you weren't intelligent enough to learn from it. My dear chosen ones, this is where your story takes a turn that they never prepared for. They thought the chaos they created would break you. They thought the whispers, the mind games, the emotional traps would leave you staggering, confused, scrambling to understand what you did wrong. But what they never realized was that you weren't just surviving their tactics, you were studying them with the precision of someone built for far greater arenas. While they laughed behind your back, convinced you were losing, you were quietly reverse engineering every psychological trick they deployed. You weren't falling apart, you were gathering intel. You weren't overwhelmed, you were observing. They mistook your silence for defeat, not knowing that chosen ones often operate at their highest power when they say nothing at all. Every guilt trip they tried to weaponize against you became a map pointing to their insecurity. Every passive-aggressive jab became a blueprint revealing their emotional patterns. Every fake apology, every manipulative compliment, every moment of fake concern became data, a catalogue of behaviors you learned to predict with terrifying accuracy. They thought they were teaching you your limits, but instead they exposed their own. And yes, chosen ones, I know there were moments when you wondered if you were the problem, if the confusion was your fault, if the emotional exhaustion meant you were weak. But think about it. How could someone weak decode an entire system built to disorient them? You were never confused. You were calculating. You were breaking the lock from the inside. They operated in clusters because none of them were strong enough to stand alone. They needed backup to maintain the illusion. They needed cosigns to validate their lies. You watched how they rehearsed betrayal like it was choreography, each one playing their part to make you doubt your reality. But instead of drowning in the chaos, you dissected it. You started noticing the patterns, the timing, the recycled tactics. You learned the rhythm of their dysfunction like a song that eventually became predictable. And once you cracked the code, the entire game fell apart. Chosen ones don't just escape manipulation. We outgrow it so drastically that the old tactics become laughable. Now, when they try to guilt you, it bounces off. When they try to twist your words, you see it forming before they even speak. When they attempt to provoke a reaction, you stay centered because you already know the outcome. Their old strategies don't hit anymore because they were built for the version of you that no longer exists. That's why they're confused now. That's why they're speechless. They don't understand how you suddenly became immune to everything that once triggered you. They don't recognize this upgraded version of you, calm, sharp, unfazed, untouchable. The truth is, you didn't just deconstruct the machine. They watched you walk away holding the blueprint they thought was hidden. That is not survival, chosen ones. That is mastery, earned, sharpened, undeniable mastery. Number 6, your silence. Wasn't surrender, it was your most dangerous weapon. Your silence wasn't surrender. It was your most advanced form of strategy. The deadliest move in any game is the one the opponent never sees coming. Silence is that move. My dear chosen ones, let's talk about the moment everyone misread you. They thought your silence was the end of your story, but it was actually the beginning of their lesson. They believed your quiet was a sign you were defeated, overwhelmed, or cornered. But silence, in the hands of someone chosen, isn't surrender. It's strategic encryption. It's you stepping into a realm they can't access, a level they can't decode, a frequency their chaos could never touch. You weren't silent because you had nothing to say. You were silent because you finally understood that not every battle deserves your breath. While they were talking loud enough to expose their intentions, you were locking in, securing your thoughts, your plans, your emotions behind a vault only you held the key to. They thought you were disappearing, when in reality you were upgrading. They thought you were frozen, when you were silently building momentum. They thought you were done, when you were simply preparing for a move that would leave them stunned. Chosen ones, silence is not the absence of power, it is the storage of power, and you stored it so well they mistook it for emptiness. You encrypted your pain so deeply that not even their sharpest attempts to pry into your life could access it. You held your process close, not because you were unsure, but because you finally realized privacy is protection, and protection is strategy. They were busy trying to read you like you were an open book, flipping through what they thought were your chapters, trying to predict your next move. But you were never a book. You were encrypted code. You moved in layers, in dimensions they didn't even know existed. They tried to study your surface, not realizing everything meaningful was happening beneath it, out of their reach and beyond their comprehension. And while they were busy performing, gossiping, and trying to control the narrative, you were quietly evolving. You healed without an audience. You rebuilt without applause. You grew without permission. You leveled up in ways that could only happen when you removed their noise from your environment. Silence became your shield, your strategy, your sanctuary. Then came the moment that always arrives for chosen ones, the reveal. The moment where everything you had been working on privately stepped into the light publicly. And they weren't just confused, they were rattled. Because by the time they realized your silence had been preparation, the results were already irreversible. The launch had already happened. The shift had already taken place. The version of you they tried to manipulate no longer existed. Now they're scrambling to understand how you moved so far, so fast, without ever announcing a thing. But that's the beauty of it, chosen ones. Silence didn't make you smaller. It made you untouchable, and no one can sabotage what they never saw coming. Number 7. You didn't strike back. You became the evidence they couldn't ignore. Your rise became the receipt they never wanted to see. Revenge loses its power the moment your success starts speaking louder than their accusations. My dear chosen ones, this is the part of your story that stings them the most, not because you fought back, but because you didn't. You could have exposed them, confronted them, matched their pettiness, dragged their names through the same mud they tried to bury you in. You had the opportunity, the evidence, the emotional ammunition. But you chose not to waste a single breath on people who thought they had the power to define you, and that decision, that was the knockout punch they never saw coming. They expected you to lash out. They were waiting for the meltdown, the tantrum, the messy reaction they could use as proof that they were right about you. They pushed buttons, crossed boundaries, twisted narratives, all hoping you'd crack under the weight of their pettiness. But instead of exploding, you expanded. Instead of retaliating, you recalibrated. Instead of fighting for their attention, you invested in your evolution. And nothing disarms insecure people faster than someone who refuses to play the game they built. You didn't need revenge, chosen one. You became the contradiction that destroyed their entire storyline. While they were busy trying to make you look unstable, you were outgrowing the environment that required their validation. While they exaggerated your imperfections, you were sharpening strengths they never even knew you had. While they whispered lies, you were solidifying truths through action, consistency, and growth. They tried to paint you as weak, but weakness doesn't evolve like this. They tried to portray you as lost, but lost people don't create the kind of clarity you walk with now. They tried to bury your reputation, but instead they fertilized your next chapter. And now they're confused, because you were supposed to crumble, yet somehow you're glowing in a way that exposes every false word they ever spoke about you. Your life became the clapback. Your success became the evidence. Your healing became the headline they never wanted printed. You didn't just move on, you moved up. And you did it so gracefully, so quietly, that they didn't even realize the distance between you and their drama until you were already miles ahead. Chosen ones, this is why they're rattled. Every achievement you step into is a silent contradiction to the narrative they tried to sell. Every room you walk into with confidence is a reminder of how wrong they were. Every healed wound is another crack in the image they projected onto you. And every time you win without acknowledging them, it hits harder than any confrontation ever could. You didn't have to destroy their lies. You simply became too real, too grounded, too undeniable for their version of you to survive. And now the people who once believed them are asking questions, because nothing exposes lies faster than living proof. Truth doesn't raise its voice. Truth doesn't chase applause. Truth doesn't argue for recognition. It simply appears. And you, chosen one, have appeared in a form they swore you'd never become. You didn't choose revenge. You chose to outgrow the battlefield entirely, and now your evolution is the consequence they never planned for. Number 8. You played the board while they played themselves. You were 10 moves ahead while they were still learning the rules. Nothing rattles an enemy more than realizing the person they tried to outsmart had already predicted their next 5 mistakes before they made the first one. My dear chosen ones, this is the part where the whole story clicks into place. Because if there's one truth about you that they never understood, it's this. You were never confused. You were calculating. You weren't behind. You were observing from a higher vantage point. They thought they were playing chess with you, but you had already mapped out the board, the pieces, and the ending before they even touched a pawn. You watched how they moved, how they spoke, how they recycled the same worn-out tactics, like they were pulling from a script they've been using on everyone else for years. And while they assumed no one noticed their patterns, you caught every detail with surgical precision. The fake concern disguised as curiosity, the sudden niceness they used to gather information, the gossip dripping with strategy, not emotion. They thought you were too naive to sense the shift, but chosen ones are never naive. You were taking mental screenshots long before they realized they were being documented. When they tested you, thinking they were being subtle, you already had the answers. The betrayal? You saw it forming before they even committed to it. The gaslighting? You recognized the twist before the sentence was finished. The sabotage? You let them pick up the shovel, fully aware they were digging a hole they wouldn't be able to climb out of. And chosen ones, let's address the question you may have asked yourself. Why didn't I stop them? Why didn't I call them out sooner? Because you didn't need to. Some things are more powerful when they reveal themselves. You weren't shocked by their behavior. You were simply letting the inevitable unfold like a movie you'd already seen. You didn't flinch. You didn't argue. You didn't scramble. You let them believe they were winning because you understood something they didn't. Ego blinds faster than any strategy can rescue. You kept smiling not because you were unaware, but because you had already mentally moved past the point they assumed you'd collapse. Your calm wasn't weakness, it was foresight. You didn't react because you didn't need to. You allowed them just enough space to expose themselves, just enough silence to fill with their own noise, just enough time to trip over their own web. And when reality finally hit them, when they realized you weren't fooled, weren't shaken, weren't blindsided, it was already too late. Their plan was unraveling under its own flaws. Their strategy collapsed before it could even reach you. They mistook your lack of response for ignorance, when in truth it was the most devastating response you could have given. That's the mastery of chosen ones. That's the elegance of foresight. You don't rush the process. You don't force the outcome. You let the game play itself out, because deep down you already know the ending was never in their hands. They tried to outsmart you, but you were 10 moves ahead the entire time. And now they're speechless, not because you fought them, but because you played the game perfectly. Number 9. You learned the dark corners of people until you could navigate them with precision. You walked through their darkness until you learned to outrun it with light. My dear chosen ones, here's the part they never understood about you. You didn't study the shadows because you were swallowed by them. You studied them because you recognized that hidden inside every dark moment was a blueprint, a pattern, a truth no one else had the courage to face. While others panicked at the first sign of betrayal or shifted their entire identity the moment envy entered the room, you stood still. You watched. You listened. You observed the subtle cracks in people's faces when their masks slipped. You didn't run from the darkness. You treated it like a classroom that only the chosen could survive. Because unlike the average person, you knew something essential. The shadows don't just hide threats, they expose motives. You saw how jealousy disguised itself as support, how fake loyalty wore a smile, how manipulation pretended to be concern. People didn't realize you were paying attention. They thought you were too quiet, too patient, too forgiving to notice the knife they kept behind their backs. But a chosen one always sees what others try to hide. And you didn't just see it, you decoded it. You recognized how some people weaponize silence to shame you, how others twist kindness into control, how emotional chaos can be used as a smokescreen to keep you off balance. But instead of absorbing their dysfunction, you analyzed it like a scientist breaking down a formula. You took notes, not because you were obsessed with the darkness, but because you knew one day you would need that knowledge to outmaneuver it. And while they assumed you were drowning in confusion, something entirely different was happening. You were sharpening your instincts to a level most people never reach. You were learning how to move through emotional storms without getting soaked. You were understanding the architecture of human behavior so deeply that nothing could surprise you anymore. This is why, chosen ones, you don't get shaken now. You get clear. You move with the steady precision of someone who has walked through fire barefoot and still came out with a spine reinforced by experience. The shadows they used to intimidate you now look small, almost laughably predictable. And that terrifies people who rely on disguise, misdirection, and emotional manipulation to maintain control. Your clarity is their greatest fear. Your awareness burns through their illusions like light cutting through fog. Your presence alone forces the truth out of people, even when they're trying to hide it. And now you move like light, not because you avoided the dark, but because you mastered it. Fast, clear, sharp, unstoppable. The same shadows that once tried to swallow you are now miles behind you, unable to touch the momentum you've built. You're not just healed, you're evolved, dangerous in the best possible way, not because you became like them, but because you learned from everything they did without letting it deform who you are. That's why nothing fake survives around you anymore. Your light exposes everything and everyone. Number 10. You wore power. So naturally, it made pretenders panic. You didn't chase power. You became the silent force that redefined it. Nothing rattles an enemy more than the person who doesn't fight for the crown, yet still commands the entire room. My dear chosen ones, this is where your evolution became undeniable. While everyone else tripped over themselves trying to look powerful, you were busy becoming powerful. Not loudly, not theatrically, not in the way insecure people do, through performance, intimidation, or desperate attempts to be seen. No, you moved differently. You moved with the quiet certainty of someone who understands that real strength isn't announced, it's felt. You didn't chase dominance. You didn't shove your way into conversations or try to outshine anyone. You didn't scramble for validation or force anyone to respect you. You simply walked in your truth, and that truth was loud enough to shake the people who once thought they towered over you. They didn't understand why your presence made them uneasy. They didn't understand how your stillness could overshadow their noise, and that confusion. It was their first taste of the reality they were never prepared for. They operated under the illusion that power belonged to the loudest person in the room. But you, chosen one, you knew better. You understood that power is not volume, it's gravity. It's that pull people feel without knowing why. It's the steadiness that doesn't crumble when challenged. It's the confidence that doesn't need applause to survive. Real power is rooted, grounded, unmoved. And that's exactly what you embodied while they were busy performing their insecurities. While they raised their voices, you raised your standards. While they tried to intimidate, you stayed centered. While they fought to be seen, you became someone they couldn't ignore. You listened more than you spoke, and every moment of that observant silence turned into an advantage. You moved with intention instead of impulse. You chose alignment over attention. And slowly but surely, the room began to shift around you. Your silence echoed louder than their shouting ever could. Your stability exposed their cracks. Your authenticity highlighted their artificiality. And that's when the panic set in, not because you attacked them, but because your presence revealed everything they were trying to hide. Fake confidence couldn't stand next to the real thing. Manipulators couldn't perform under the weight of your clarity. Liars couldn't maintain their stories when your energy peeled back their layers without a single word spoken. They mocked what they couldn't measure. They underestimated what they couldn't read. But now the aftershocks of your quiet rise are dismantling the narratives they built about you. Their rumors sound ridiculous in the face of your growth. Their illusions crumble because your reality is stronger than their fiction. They're shaken because you didn't just enter the space, you shifted the entire atmosphere. You didn't just rise, you disrupted everything they relied on to feel powerful. And the most beautiful part of it all, you never had to raise your voice. You never needed to prove anything. Your energy did all the talking, and your evolution delivered the final blow. Number 11. You let their false narrative collapse under its own weight. You let them build their own trap while you stayed 3 steps ahead. Nothing destroys an enemy faster than giving them enough rope to reveal who they really are. My dear chosen ones, this chapter of your story is one of the most misunderstood and one of the most powerful. Because people assume strength is loud, reactive, explosive. But you chose a different kind of strength. You chose silence, composure, and precision, and that terrifies people who rely on chaos to win. They thought they had you pinned. They were so confident in their little setup, so sure that if they pushed the right buttons, you would eventually crack. They expected you to lash out, break down, or expose yourself out of emotional exhaustion. They needed you to react. They were counting on it. That was the whole strategy. Provoke you, then blame you for the reaction. But you didn't give them what they wanted. Instead of crumbling, you went still. Still like someone who already knows how the story ends. Still like someone who doesn't need a crowd to validate the truth. Still like a chosen one who refuses to play in the mud with people who rely on dirt to feel tall. And that, right there, is where everything began to shift. while they were twisting your words, collecting half-truths, and repackaging their insecurity as facts. You said nothing. You didn't rush to clear your name. You didn't chase anyone down for approval. You didn't fall for their emotional bait. You simply allowed time to do what time always does, expose what can't hold itself together. Chosen ones understand something average people don't. Lies always collapse under their own weight, and the heavier the lie, the faster it falls apart. They were so desperate to bring you down that they forgot to be consistent. The stories got bigger, more dramatic, more unhinged. They lost track of what they said last week. They contradicted themselves. They slipped. They exposed themselves without you lifting a single finger. That's what happens when someone tries to build a case against a person who isn't even playing the same game. You didn't need to defend yourself because the truth doesn't require a microphone. It simply requires patience. And while you stayed rooted in who you are, the people they tried to recruit began noticing the cracks. Questions formed, doubt spread. The narrative started to fall apart. Suddenly, the story they built wasn't about you anymore. It was a reflection of them. The messy tower of lies they constructed became a monument to their own insecurity. And the best part, they hung themselves with the very rope they tried to wrap around your name. They exposed their motives. They exposed their jealousy. They exposed their obsession with trying to control a version of you they invented. You didn't rise because you fought dirty. You rose because you refused to step into their darkness. You let the truth do what truth always does, hit harder than any revenge ever could. And now they're choking on the very narrative they created, unable to escape the consequences of the story they wrote. Chosen ones don't need retaliation. Chosen ones let people reveal themselves, and that is exactly why they are speechless now. You played the game so perfectly, they destroyed their own credibility, trying to destroy you. And as we wrap this up, my dear chosen ones, remember this. You didn't just survive the game. You mastered it in a way that left every opponent stunned into silence. Their attempts to stop you became the very proof of your strength, your clarity, and your evolution. Now it's your turn to claim that truth fully. If this message hit you where it needed to, show it. Like the video, hit subscribe, drop 77 in the comments to confirm your rise, and share this with another chosen one who's breaking every silent limit placed on them.